We return to the cold truth, where we have exposed that pro-choice is a lie. They are so entrenched in falsehoods that it is not even questioned among them whether what they refer to as only a fetus is actually alive. Today, we will end the lie that life does not start until birth. The majority of pro-choice voters are under the erroneous impression that a human fetus is a potential human, a future human. Therefore, they are not independently alive, and therefore, they cannot be killed. Some push this far enough to say that fetuses have no rights. If that was the case, there would be no more problem destroying a human fetus than there would be destroying a cancerous tumor. This is the same logic that has been used to start genocides. Let us look first at the origin of this theory. Aristotle, a widely known philosopher who is acknowledged as the father of the modern belief that life does not start at conception, is credited with having coined the phrase proobevtiki empsychosi, which is typically translated as progressive ensoulment. He theorized that a soul enters the fetal body in stages, reaching full ensoulment at 40 days for boys and 90 for girls. Though ancient in his reasoning and veritably flawed in his logic, there have been no attempts made by pro-choice to disprove it. Other philosophers and scholars base their evidence that a fetus is not a human on this foundation, which is as flawed as anyone after 2000 BC having a belief that the earth is flat, another philosophy with which we have an issue, but let's focus on one neurosis at a time. We are skilled researchers with degrees in research. As we will not reveal our names or faces, you will have to trust us on that. After reviewing, personally, by hand, 1,000 independent sites, blogs, and posts touting abortion, we discovered that over 150 of them mentioned Aristotle and his proobevtiki empsychosi. 150! That seems a small number, but no other name came up 15 times. No other ancient or publicly accepted logic was mentioned even 10 times. Allow us to quote one source who we are sure was hoping to persuade people of the virtues of abortion. Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of all time, said the human fetus isn't alive because it can't sustain life outside the womb, and who can argue with Aristotle? The answer? Anyone who graduated modern 4th grade. Aristotle was not a scientist. He was a social philosopher trying to justify the way the world worked with his own observations in a time without sonograms, microscopes, or DNA tests. Some of his statements were astute, but most were chauvinistic and showed that he was trying to use the world to prove his model that women were inferior. He believed slaves were born to be slaves, and that the sun revolves around the earth. Aristotle vivisected live animals and made blanket statements that blood is the collectivity of food processed by the body and is all homogeneous. He stated that a plant commits abortions when it does not desire its offspring. He argued with his teacher, Plato, that the world was as it should be, and that there was no ideal to which humans could or even should aspire. He taught Alexander the Great that the best way to lead a nation was to treat his people as friends and his enemies as beasts. His philosophies on women were particularly monstrous. Let's look again at the length of time that it supposedly takes for the soul to enter a male versus a female. Why does it take twice as long to enter a female? Because the Greeks worshipped the male body. The female body was considered ugly and inferior, so the destruction of the female fetus within the first trimester was less of a sin in his jaded mind than killing a male fetus in the first month. He is also famous for other anti-feminist statements. He is quoted as saying, and we quote, "Women are doomed to be subservient to men because that they are unable to control themselves physically and psychologically through the exercise of reason the way men can." He stated that a woman's monthly bleeding was the reason she was weak in body, mind, and spirit. Women, is this your champion? We think not. And yet, once they say, Aristotle said we can have abortions, millions say, "Yay, Aristotle! I heard that name once. That must mean I'm not killing a living being." Let us look more closely at prodephtheki and psychosi. The word, as used in Aristotle's day, is typically translated as soul, something most pro-choicers do not even believe in, but, using modernly accepted terms, would be more closely referred to as a psyche. Modernly stated, Aristotle believed that the psyche did not form in fetuses until 40 or 90 days. Any mother who has carried a child and watched that child grow will testify that she witnessed her child's distinct personality in the womb, and often long before 90 days. By the standard accepted by pro-choicers, soul is a synonym for personality. The idea that a fetus has personality is absolute. It is certain. It is rejected only by those who already have their eye on murdering the innocent. At very least, no male fetus should be killed after 40 days, and, as we cannot determine the gender without an expensive DNA test until at very least 110 days, Aristotle's philosophy should actually be used to say that abortions cannot be done at all, since there is no time in which we both know for certain the gender and the child does not, according to him, have a psyche. Circular logic perhaps, but conspiracies are good at that, and as they say, turnabout is fair play. Now, moving away from Aristotle, who is obviously not to be taken at face value, let's talk about the meaning of life. We do not mean, why am I here? Though any answer to that question not born from existentialism would immediately prove abortion defeats the purpose of life. In this case, we mean, what does the word life mean? Remember, by the standard of pro-choice, a fetus is not alive and, therefore, cannot be killed. Would you agree that if a fetus can be proven to be alive, then an abortion would be considered murder? Unlikely, we think, but we will attempt anyway to use the definition of life to prove that a fetus is very much alive. The widely accepted Oxford English Dictionary's most recent edition defines life as follows: the condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, including the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death. Let's dissect this and prove that a fetus is very much alive. 1. The condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter. The first clause says it all. What distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter? It has a name: deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. DNA means something is or has been alive. All living beings have it. Animals have it, plants have it, humans have it, fetuses have it. No beings that are not, nor have ever been alive, have it. The dead have DNA, it is true, but the fetus is neither dead nor dying, so it must be alive. An embryo's DNA can be tested with effort. A fetus's DNA can definitely be tested. Therefore, a fetus has DNA. If DNA means a being is or has been alive, and a fetus has DNA, a fetus is or has been alive. The best pro-choice can do is attempt to write off the fetus as a cancer, an undesirable growth, a tumor. The fetus having its own organs implies it is not a tumor, but an entirely separate being. 2. Including the capacity for growth. Mind you, capacity for growth means that something can grow in some way without being acted on by an outside force, not necessarily that it does. A grown human may not grow in height, but there is no argument that adult humans are not alive. Some may argue that it is the mother's body that is performing the action of growing the embryo or fetus, but this is biologically unsound. A fertilized plant seed grows on its own without being inside its parent. The embryo of a fertilized egg of an oviparous animal, meaning an animal that lays eggs, which comprises almost all non-mammal species on the planet, grows on its own without being inside its parent. The fetus of all viviparous animals, which comprises almost all mammals and some other species too, grow on their own with reliance upon their mother. Though their mother provides the nutrition present in the yolk of an egg of an oviparous animal, It is the DNA of the mammal itself that allows growth, or, said another way, the growth is contingent upon DNA. The mother can influence her baby's growth, but suggesting that she is the only factor behind it would falsely imply that a mother who does everything right, who eats and moves healthily, but whose child ends up with a defect, deformity, or miscarriage, is still responsible. So, yes, expectant mothers have the ability to affect the well-being of their offspring, but it is ultimately up to the child's own biological potential whether they thrive in an otherwise safe fetal environment. Again, this definition implies the potential for growth, not actual growth. Whether the fetus grows normally is up to their DNA, but the potential is still there. Only if the organism tragically perishes in utero due to either genetic or environmental factors, which include abortion, is that potential stopped. 3. Including the capacity for reproduction. The embryo's sex is decided upon conception, almost always by the male zygote with exceptions too few to name. Some lies have proliferated that sex is not defined for 9 weeks, but that defies everything that one could have learned in 5th grade sex ed. The fact that the male zygote passes on an X or a Y chromosome which defines the embryo's sex cannot be argued. What some might argue is that a child does not have capacity for reproduction at that time. As for the actual capacity for reproduction, this forms between 8 and 12 weeks of gestation. All fetuses have the genetic markers for one gender or the other, but their formation for the first 8 to 12 weeks is morphologically identical. In other words, for the first 8 to 12 weeks, they have a biological gender, but their physical body actually has the capacity for both genitalia, not neither, which could be argued as giving them greater capacity for reproduction. At 8 weeks or so, if the DNA markers are male, or rather, if chromosome 23 has a Y marker, the male genitalia will begin to form. In theory, an infant male could impregnate a female, though the likelihood of that is infinitesimal. The only point here is that even from 8 weeks, a male fetus has the potential for reproduction. By 12 weeks, if chromosome 23 does not have a Y marker, the existing ovaries will have populated. At this point, the fetus now has the capacity for reproduction. To that end, Aristotle wasn't entirely off the mark on boys receiving boyhood sooner. More specifically, however, that means that even if a DNA test has to be performed to determine gender, the absolute latest at which an abortion could be performed when the fetus does not have capacity for reproduction is at 56 days for a boy or 84 days for a girl. Some may try to justify that a girl has no ability to reproduce until her first menstruation, but does that mean that a girl is not alive until she menstruates? Some might say, what about men or women who are biologically incapable of reproduction? We answer that corner case with our own question. Are they not alive because their DNA did not bless them with fertility? Again, the criteria is capacity. That does not mean ability. Just because a woman is not able to conceive does not mean she does not have the capacity to conceive. That capacity is manifested in her internal organs, which are grown based on the map from her DNA, which is established from the first second, not based on the deluded wishes of someone trying to escape the reality of pregnancy. 4. Including the capacity for functional activity. A look into the definition of capacity may be in order. The definition of capacity from the same source is the maximum amount that something can produce. Maximum here is the key word. Rewritten, this definition of life reads, including up to the maximum of functional activity. Being born with minimal function does not mean the maximum capacity has changed, just like being born with minimal hair does not invalidate the world record for having the most hair at birth. The DNA and/or pregnancy condition may have led to a life that has lower potential, but not lower capacity. The two are not the same. To prove it, imagine two identical 1-cup liquid measuring containers. One is placed in the rainforest, the other in the desert, and both are examined at the end of an equal length of time. It can be expected that the rainforest cup is overflowing, while the desert cup is dry and empty. After all, the potential for rain in the rainforest is much higher than the potential for rain in the desert. However, the capacity of the two cups was, is, and will always remain the same. And don't throw out expansion and contraction as an argument that's putting the cart before the horse and can be easily rectified. The point is that killing a child because they do not have a potential for functional activity is like not putting the cup in the desert because it is less likely to be filled. It may prove very much the opposite. Often, children who are born with less apparent potential for physical and mental activity still have tremendous capacity for spiritual and social activity, for improving the lives of their family and those around them. Think of Tiny Tim from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Having lower potential does not mean the desert measuring cup is not worth putting out in the first place. In fact, it may be more valuable in the end, since a cup of water in the desert is worth much more than a cup of water in a rainforest. Therefore, regardless of potential for activity, the capacity for activity is still there. Therefore, even a completely non-functional child is still alive, and killing them in utero is still murder. 5. Including the capacity for continual change preceding death. We do not really have to go into detail on this one. It matches closely with the points made before. Suffice it to say that embryos grow into fetuses, and fetuses grow into newborns, and so forth. There is continual change preceding death, which means that a fetus is alive until a murderer kills it. The dictionary gave 5 criteria for life. A fetus matches all 5. Therefore, a fetus is alive, and abortion, which ends the life of a fetus, is a sugar-coated synonym for murder, according to an unbiased and universally accepted source. Before we move on, we wish to discuss the buzzword personhood. According to numerous pro-choice advocates, a fetus cannot be alive because it does not have personhood. What is personhood? Typically, people say it is the ability to survive outside the womb. Though their chances are slim, a fetus can leave the womb as early as 21 weeks, with each day after that increasing their odds of surviving. While it is true that fewer than 1% of abortions in the US happen after that time, that still means that about 10,000 babies who could have survived outside the womb were killed in 2023. That's more than all the people killed in 9/11, the Oklahoma City bombing, all school shootings, and all natural disasters in the United States of the 21st century combined. So even if the other 990,000 are not people, that's still enough to start wars over. That's 10,000 murders which were neither prosecuted nor punished. That's 10,000 murders justified because of words. Words! Not logic, just words, whose definitions are vague and changeable. Ironic, isn't it, that the majority of people who call themselves vegan and vegetarian are pro-choice. They tremble at the idea of killing an animal for the sake of eating it, but most have no qualms about killing a human for the sake of not wanting it. Let's review that again, shall we? They will not eat an animal because it is alive, but they will throw away a human life because it is not. How many like-minded individuals have started genocides? Let us kill all the people who are too tall, too short, too smart, too dumb, too thin, too fat, too dark, too light, too different from us, too similar to us, because they are not really alive. What a craven justification. What a broken mentality. And yet millions in this modern conspiracy ascribe to it because a philosopher who died in 322 BC said it, so therefore it must be true. Well, it's not, and if we have not proven it to you yet, join us next time as we discuss how the popularity of abortion does not make it legal. The cold truth will not rest.